All right, let's in fact stay with the story, right, and take you back in time to IDAC and when it was actually formed. For example, let's take you back in history, the evolution of IDAC. You'd remember at some point we had ID, which was the Investigative Directorate led by Hermione Cornier at the time, and it was then established in 2019, and we then saw its powers being expanded, and also then a permanent structure then becomes announced. And you're seeing this in 2022 with a number of people saying this is going to be important because we need to be able to fight corruption as a country. And then we're seeing there are some amendments that are then made, and as the amendments are being made, we see ID becoming IDAC, and with an oversight judge then being established for that particular institution. You remember that briefing there that we saw last week. And then when we look at this particular entity, why was it created? It was a response to state capture. We had that Zondo Commission that came out and spoke about, of course, a lot of what that was going on in the country. But one of the recommendations was a body like this in order to be able to tackle complex graft, right, that ordinary prosecutorial units were struggling with. Because the biggest thing that came out from the Zondo Commission as part of, in fact, as far as the work of prosecutors are concerned, is that when you're looking at some of these complex investigations, top tier cases, for example, and you're looking at lengthy investigations, and then the actual prosecutions at the same time also becoming a challenge, and then an issue of skills then as well also being raised, especially when it comes to dealing with issues that are going to make sure that we have an anti-graft unit as a permanent structure. Because ultimately, when you think of these top cases, there has been a concern by many South Africans that these top cases at times do not result in convictions. So when you're looking at the probes, you then need to make sure that there's prosecutions, that we do see people actually being behind bars as far as all of this work is concerned. So then you're looking at what then changed when it comes to the powers, for example, of the Investigative Directorate versus IDAC. We then saw that the ID became, was a temporary unit. It had a limited lifespan before everything else changed for it to be a permanent structure. It now has full police powers, specialist investigators, especially this issue, this one is very key. The issue of specialist investigators is key because you do need the skills. Remember, even when Hermione Cornier was speaking during her own interview for the position of the head of the NPA, she spoke about how much of a headache this was for her, that you do need skills. It was frustrating that in some of these, cases, you need the skills, but you do not have them. And even going as far as saying that she would have been charged with irregular expenditure had she stayed on, because she wanted to have more people to be able to at least do what needed to be done. So this was, the hope to say that now that you've got the skills, now that you're looking at making sure that you are able to then bring those particular probes into prosecutions, let's see then what else gets to be done, especially when it comes to convictions, because a lot of South Africans have been talking about the issue of convictions. So let's look at, for example, the powers, right? It investigates corruption, and this is one of the big ones, especially because these investigations are serious, especially when you think about corruption, leads its own prosecutions, for example, and also can subpoena witnesses. This is also important to note, because when you also look at the complaints against it are now, overseen by a dedicated oversight judge, ensuring that the unit in and itself is accountable, because this is where things stand right now. When you think about the work of the Malanga Commission, the issues of accountability, the issues of ensuring that a lot of the work that IDAC is going to be doing, is actually what it should be doing. The focus of what it should, be focusing on is also coming under scrutiny, given some of what we've heard from the Malanga Commission and the Minister of Justice saying that the, South Africans must continue to trust this particular entity, and making sure that the credibility of IDAC must be protected.